Before I start this narration, I need to come clean about something. I grew up in New Delhi, and the Godman that I discussed today had quite a mainstream footprint in the lives of regular people like me in the 2000s. There used to be a tree that this guy had supposedly sanctified, a wish granting tree that attracted thousands of students, including yours truly. I tied a thread around this tree so that I could get decent marks in mathematics. Well, I tell you, it doesn't work. But I would have done anything to earn a respectable grade in math. I tell you this at the very beginning of the story to illustrate Asaram's hold on the lives of millions of people all over North India. Millions had drank this man's Kool-Aid, including politicians and governors of different states. The story of this godman came into national spotlight for all the wrong reasons in 2013. Before 2013, there were some whispers of his misconduct, but it never captured the attention of the police and the judiciary quite like it did a decade ago. So, let's start from the beginning. Asaram Bapu. By the way, the word Bapu in English would mean father or father like. It's an honorific which is given to great men. For example, Mahatma Gandhi is called Bapu. He obviously deserves that. So the man we now know as Asaram was born as Asumal Harpalani to his parents in the Sindh province, which is now in Pakistan. They moved to India from Pakistan once independence was gained from the British in 1947, and they made Ahmedabad, Gujarat their new home. Reporting by journalist Brijesh Singh and Manish Sharma traces the origins of Asumal Harpalani from the city of Ahmedabad in Gujarat, and they report that Asumal's mother was a woman by the name of Mehejiba, and his father, whose name by the way I couldn't confirm, died while Asumal was very young. But before his death, his father was known to be a poor man who made a meager living by selling charcoal and wood. Asumal attended a school called Jai Hind High School, but he had to drop out after the third grade to help his father sell wood door to door. Many say that young Asumal took over as the breadwinner of the family upon his father's death by selling illegal alcohol as a teenager. In fact, the police commissioner who later wrote a book about this man writes, quote, prior to him establishing himself as a religious leader, Asumal was involved in a variety of jobs from selling liquor and tea to repairing cycles. His was a colorful life, unquote. In 1958-59, he has been reported as selling tea in the Mehsana district of Gujarat. However, later reporting by Tehelka magazine reporter J. Majumdar says that selling tea was just a front to peddle liquor. In case you're not from India, you might not know that the state of Gujarat in India is a dry state, which means it's liquor free. The nationwide ban on liquor happens on some special occasions like a festival. However, the statewide ban in Gujarat first occurred in 1949 as a special acknowledgement of Mahatma Gandhi, whose birthplace is Gujarat and whose philosophy was very much opposed to alcohol consumption. Just as an aside, there's a fascinating book about this whole thing. It's called Patel, The Politics of Alcoholism in India. I'll link it in the description box in case you're interested in reading that. Now, back to Asumal's story. Journalistic endeavors have uncovered many residents who are now in their late 70s and early 80s who claim to remember an instance when Asumal or someone from his family killed someone under the influence of alcohol. It has also been reported by many seekers who live in the spiritual city of Mount Abu, which is in Rajasthan. They say that Asaram, whose name was Asumal at that time, sat in caves, drinking and smoking weed and calling that a spiritual experience. Well, I can see some of you smiling there. Maybe you too believe that smoking with weed is indeed a spiritual experience, but just wait to hear what unfolds in this story. Now, another fun fact, every time I type the name Asumal into my Word document, the Word document keeps suggesting that I should change this word to the word animal. And as you will come to know, that the word animal is actually more apt for this man that we now know as Asaram. Anyway, back to the story. In the 1960s, Asumal abandoned any pretext of selling tea or milk. He just went all in selling liquor. He amassed a significant wealth like this. However, his followers will tell you that he made a living in those formative years by selling sugar with his brother to make ends meet. Some places also report that he even ferried people for cash from one railway station to the other, and he supposedly also ferried people to the Sufi shrine, which is also known as the Ajmer Dargah, which is the shrine of the Saint Moinuddin Chishti, which attracts people from all over the world. From this Godman's official magazine, which is called Divya Gyan, which translates to divine knowledge, narrates the life of his early to late teens. It says something came over Asumal in the early 1950s and he started to take a more intense and interest in spirituality and a religious path. In fact, the magazine says that he went looking for spiritual enlightenment all over India, and at that time he was just a teenager. The magazine further states that Asumal meditated all by himself in forests, in hills, in caves, even from the snow-peaked mountains of Kedarnath to the banks of several rivers. Around this time, while he was still a teenager, Asumal went to meet a guru in the spiritual city of Vrindavan, which is very famous in North India as the headquarters of the Hare Krishna temple, the ISKCON movement. Now, Asumal supposedly waited 40 days in the holy city of Vrindavan to catch a glimpse of this famous guru. Now, just another fun fact, in Sanskrit, the syllable gu means darkness and ru means to take away. So, the meaning of the word guru is someone who takes away your darkness. Now, back to the Asaram story. So, after 40 days of waiting, Asaram eventually meets this sage, whose name was Guru Leela Shah Maharaj. He was inspired and he begged this guru to teach him meditation. Leela Shah apparently told him to chant a mantra for a particular period of time, and only when Asumal would prove himself as a worthy man would Leela Shah Maharaj entertain Asumal or initiate him into any kind of spiritual path. Apparently, Asumal persisted, and eventually Leela Shah Maharaj gave him what's called a Guru Mantra, or like a divine mantra to chant. This deepened Asumal's connection with his Guru, and after taking this mantra, he returned back to his home in Gujarat. After a few days of living there, he tells his family that he had had a spiritual awakening and would not be living a domestic existence. Leela Shah Maharaj was apparently so impressed by Asumal that he eventually insisted that Asumal should be called Asaram. And the day he changed from Asumal to Asaram, the day was October 7th, 1964. Now, unlike someone who's on a spiritual path, Asaram actually got married at the age of 20 to a woman called Lakshmi, who was just 16 years old, and that was very acceptable back then. And it goes without saying that this was an arranged marriage. Now, I should point out that unlike many religions, for example Catholicism, which requires celibacy and abstinence, Hinduism requires no such thing. In fact, the word requirement is fundamentally opposed to the very basis of Hinduism. Anyway, back to Asaram. A few years later, his wife gave birth to a son and a daughter. Now, the son is very integral to this story later on, so let me start by telling you his name. His name was Narayan Swami, and his daughter's name is Bharti Shri, although some sources also say that her name is Bharti Devi. So, between 1964 to 1970, spiritual seekers from around the state of Gujarat and the nearby state of Rajasthan came to hear of Asaram. They began to attend his spiritual and religious lectures, and these used to be small gatherings. This is how Asaram crowdfunded his very first ashram. Now, the word ashram, you can think of that as like a seminary or a place for religious guidance. So it's not strictly just a temple. So in 1972, he established his first ashram in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. According to his devotees, Asaram is known to cure incurable diseases. He can cause rainfall in drought-stricken areas. He can bless the poor with wealth, the educated with even more intellect, the uneducated with intellect. He has been projected as an incarnation of God. In fact, the public relations officer of the Asaram Trust claims that Asaram cured her of her habit of drinking 35 cups of tea a day. Another famous case of Asaram's devotees achieving the impossible is of a man called Virender Mehta, who supposedly memorized 80,000 words from the Oxford English Dictionary, and his name was recorded in the Limca Book of World Records. Yet another case of a man is of actually quite a famous person. His name is O.P. Mull, and he used to be the chairman of Howrah Jute Mills. He apparently walked out of one of Indore's hospitals after being told by doctors repeatedly that he will be paralyzed for life. And apparently all this happened because of Asaram's blessings. Yet another man by the name of Anil from Motera claims to have recovered his lost sight thanks to the blessings of Asaram Bapu. Stories like these ones that I just told you helped cultivate and reinforce Asaram's saintly credentials. So the journey from Asumal to Asaram and later to being Christian Bapu took about 10 years. What bolstered Asaram into the stratosphere was that on September 1993, Asaram participated in what's called the Parliament of World's Religions in Chicago. Now, 600 speakers from around the world attend this event, and Asaram spoke as India's chief speaker, kind of like being a spokesperson. And this was in 1993. So, Asaram's marketing team ensured that he spoke exactly 100 years after Swami Vivekananda. Now, Swami Vivekananda, I don't have time to go into his history. He was a phenomenal figure in Indian psyche and had done so much. So, Asaram projected himself as the same kind of inspirational, one of a kind, once in a century kind of sage who was just full of wisdom. Asaram seemed to have made a great use of the Indian psyche, which places all gurus on a pedestal. This man was followed by poor people, by middle class people, and by affluent people. In total, it's been said that he was followed by around 40 million people. So by the early 1990s, Asaram was an established figure, and politicians started flocking to him as the number of his devotees grew from multiple thousands into millions. Politicians all over North India especially saw Asaram's followers as vote banks and appeased his demands by giving him parcels of government land so that Asaram could continue making temples and ashrams. Just as an example, the state of Gujarat allotted him 14,515 square feet of land, followed by another 25,000 square feet of land in 1999. While this particular example is in fact genuine, most of his land grabs were not. By the way, If you remember, I told you about my own example of trying a thread around a certain tree just to pass my math exam. Well, that actually happened in a place called Delhi Ridge, which is around the University of Delhi, North Campus, which was and is still supposed to be a construction free forested area, which is desperately needed in a concrete jungle like Delhi. Now, this man had placed one tree there and he had supposedly taken all that land as well. Now, this guy was quite smart. He had supposedly sanctified a lot of trees all over India, and this was one of his ways of initiating land grabs. In 1997, Princess Gayatri Devi of the Shakti royal family of Chhattisgarh reportedly donated a 21-acre plot of land to Asaram to construct his Chindwara seminary. Now, the royal family in fact says that Gayatri Devi was in fact forced into signing those property papers, and Asaram took advantage of this unsuspecting lady's advanced age. By the year 2000, the number of his temples and holy sites around India was 450, and he had established 1700 childcare centers. He had also established 50 residential schools. He had also established around 1400 Sri Yog Vedanta Samitis, around 26 Gurukuls. Now, Gurukul is actually a Hindu seminary, and most of this land was unlawfully acquired. This man portrayed himself as a selfless, giving, benevolent religious figure, and he has been accused of squatting on large parcels of land which actually belong to ordinary people who will never be able to fight against this man's undue influence and his money. An estimation of his properties and assets, as published in the Economic Times, stands at a staggering more than $1 billion USD, and the Indian way of saying it will be 1000 crore INR. This man called himself a god or a saintly man or a monk-like figure, and the list of his land grabs is immense. And I won't bore you any further with those details, but it suffices to say that this man loves grabbing everyone else's land. He has been repeatedly taken to the court by individuals, by state governments, by agricultural land trusts, in separate cases in 2006, 2009, 2010. The list of his court cases is also endless, so I'm not going to bore you any further with those details. Just like any self-respected godman of his caliber, he of course owned a huge fleet of luxury cars and helicopters. In addition, he also accumulated all this wealth by selling CDs of his wisdom. And I put the word wisdom in heavy quotations. And you can't see it, but I'm smirking when I say it. He was also selling books on spirituality and devotion. He was also in the business of making and selling traditional Indian naturopathic medicines, which is called Ayurveda. So he was selling that. It goes without saying that all this was tax-free because this man was supposedly a religious figure. He earned money also by selling VIP seats at his spiritual gatherings, and he of course charged for one-on-one meetings and greetings with anyone who could pay. For a man who at one point lived the life of a monk, his quests have been of a notorious variety. Money laundering, loan sharking are the least damaging things that this man indulged in. Asaram amassed wealth and claimed himself to be God on earth, but all this was only a little part of his ambition. He wanted to control land, commodities, human bodies, and what's even worse, the minds and freedom of his devotees. His empire was genuinely formidable. In 2008, though, the very first whispers of his misconduct began to emerge when dead bodies of two brothers named Dipesh and Abhishek, one about 10 years old and the other one was about 11, were found inside Asaram's oldest religious center, which is in Ahmedabad. These kids were children of devotees. In fact, When their bodies were discovered, their internal organs were missing, and it's been reported that these boys died because of black magic. But reports of these deaths were supposedly suppressed because of Asaram's political pressure. In the same year, which was 2008, a 4-year-old boy by the name of Mohanlal Yadav was also found dead in another ashram of Asaram. I can understand the word Asaram and the word ashram can sound very similar, so I'll just keep saying the word seminary. So, Mohanlal Yadav was found dead inside one of those seminaries, which is in the Chindwara area of Rajasthan. A month after that, another 5-year-old boy, whose name was Vedant Manode, was discovered dead and discarded in one of the seminary toilets which belonged to Asaram. This death too was investigated by the police and was found to be linked with black magic. When the parents of these boys were interviewed later, they claimed to have said, quote, "It was their fate to lose those children," unquote. Now imagine the extent of brainwashing it would take for someone to convince you of saying such a thing. The police actually arrested a mentally unstable 9th grader for the killing of all these boys. However, there is no evidence to prove that 9th grader did anything. It seems like that boy was another sacrificial lamb or just a mere pawn. Now, later in the same year, now the year is again the same, which is 2008, the body of yet another boy whose name cannot be confirmed was found dead in yet another seminary. Now, despite all these whispers, Asaram continued to loom large in the lives of millions of devotees, and his image was solidified even more when in 2012, Asaram's helicopter crashed, but he escaped without a single scratch. To his followers, this was proof that this man was blessed and could change the lives of other people. In fact, after the crash, Asaram said, quote, "Nature does show miracles to save the righteous," unquote. In 2009, a man called Raju Chandak, who's known to be a former disciple and a devotee of Asaram, accused Asaram of attempting to murder him. And why was Asaram trying to murder him? Because apparently Raju Chandak, who was at some point Asaram's secretary, later became a whistleblower about all the illicit activities that were going on in Asaram's so-called seminaries. In fact, in September 2013, an article was published in a magazine which is called Week, not WEAK. And this magazine published a report of a man called Rohit Pachuri, who was a devotee who had mysteriously died in one of the spiritual gatherings that Asaram was holding. Now, later on, the victim's family said that their son was poisoned because he had gotten to know of Asaram's secret. Asaram was able to get a lot of prime time slots on lots of television channels, and by doing that, he reached millions and millions of people. At the same time, he was also very well known for recruiting a lot of thugs and as volunteers for his ashram. Now, these men would regularly thrash any kind of journalist or reporter who was trying to question the activities of Asaram. Another thing that Asaram did to capitalize on the psyche of most of the people in the late 1990s and early 2000s was that he became a local advocate against westernization. He hired a horde of unemployed men who were misguided male followers, and those misguided followers went around different states of North India beating and humiliating couples, and in effect, Asaram tried to abolish Valentine's Day. Now, these thugs would target small and big businesses that stocked up on greeting cards or teddy bears or chocolates, any kind of Valentine Day paraphernalia. As soon as these thugs saw that paraphernalia, they would burn those businesses to the ground. They would beat up couples with bamboo sticks, and they would brand these young couples and businesses as anti-Hindu and pro-Western culture. So Asaram, in fact, made all his followers observe February 15th not as Valentine's Day but as Parents' Worship Day. By this time, Asaram was so influential that the chief minister of the state of Chhattisgarh, whose name was Raman Singh, still is Raman Singh, at that time he was the chief minister, announced on February 14, 2007 that February 14th would now be Parents' Worship Day in Chhattisgarh. Now, things like these kept giving Asaram nationwide publicity and cemented him in the public imagination as a quote-unquote saint. It's his popularity that made him immune to controversies around him. Anytime anyone would speak up about anything, Asaram would spin that entire thing as people being jealous of him and people wanting to bring him down. It seemed like Asaram would always remain immune to consequences. But Asaram's biggest vulnerability was not land, was not wealth. It turned out to be his weakness for women. Between 2008 and 2013, it was later found because of journalistic endeavor that 595 girls had disappeared for prolonged periods of time, and it's been claimed that these girls were trafficked from one residential school to the other, from one seminary to the other at Asaram's discretion. And now I'm going to tell you about his rather elaborate and foolproof modus operandi to get these young girls in bed. Now, for all of you aspiring cult leaders out there, you should start taking notes. So, the court transcripts in this case say that during communal lectures and during communal gatherings, Asaram would stand on a stage. I'm going to insert a few visuals there so that you can visualize this even better. Asaram would stand on a stage, and from that vantage, he would take a nice hard look at all the women, and he would apparently throw a fruit at a girl who caught his eye. And I'm trying to suppress my laughter here. This is like the third time I've recorded this sentence. Next, he would employ his people whose sole purpose was basically to scout these girls from these big gatherings and bring them to Asaram. So next, the people that he had employed would approach these girls and their families on whom the fruit projectile was earlier launched upon, and then the girls and their families were asked and coerced and coaxed into sending those girls to female seminaries or residential schools. Now, these families were told that Asaram performs rituals and miracles and prays over all the students who are inside his residential schools and inside his seminaries. Now, once a woman had been convinced, now I shouldn't call them women, once those girls were convinced to join Asaram's either residential schools or seminaries, she would effectively become an inmate in his jail. And her family could neither communicate with those girls, they could not speak to those girls or even come to see them. In fact, Asaram's own physician, whose name was Amrut Prajapati, is quoted to have saying that Asaram had forced thousands of women and girls to sleep with him. The story, of course, doesn't end here. It merely begins here. So, join me next week because I'll be telling you about the cat and mouse game that ensued the minute the police tried to get their hands on this godman. And of course, I'll also tell you about his beloved son, who was even worse than this guy, if you can believe it. So, what did you think about this story so far? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Until I see you next week, stay collectively vigilant.